Oh, that wild dog looks like quite heavily pregnant. Look at her belly. And we may be having to keep a lookout for a wild dog den in this area, which is very exciting. Oh, and it looks like we're off. You can really see how that communication comes into play between the pack members when they're looking for something to hunt. Welcome back to the Xaranna concession. Today, Barden and I are not looking for anything in particular, but because the concession is so large, there's a lot of areas that don't get driven very often. And so today, we are going to be looking around the airstrip. What do you think we'll see today, Barden?
Yeah, out here we can find anything, especially the area haven't been driven by any guides, so the animals might move around. That will give us an opportunity to spot them.
We're in luck, I think. We just got word that the wild dogs are at the airstrip, so we are going to head there very quickly. And I really hope that they're still there when we get there. We did it! We found the wild dogs! We have been looking for wild dogs pretty much since day one here in the Delta, and we have had almost zero luck. Tracks every now and then, but other than that, no sign of them being around. Now, there are multiple packs of wild dogs in this concession, and this is, it looks like the Nabega pack, so there should be around anywhere between 12 to 14 members of this pack, and at the moment some of them are huddled up in the shade here, but they are quite spread out amongst these shrubs. Look at those two. I love how the one's resting its head on top of the other one. And you'd think, you know, maybe they'd get a bit hot when they're lying on top of each other like that, but it does help them to actually strengthen their social bond. So by keeping close contact, they're able to know exactly where one another is. But also it's because there's quite limited shade here. But can you see how they're a little bit nervous? Every now and then they lift their heads, especially when they hear a loud noise. And that's because it's very windy today. So I mean, with those big ears, you can imagine they're picking up all sorts of sounds. And so they need to be able to identify exactly what it is. These dogs are not built for strength. They're built for endurance, so they're built to cover long distances. Being a pack animal, they don't need that amount of muscle, and so often it's more a case of traveling long distances and being able to chase prey for long distances without getting tired. And so if there is another predator in the area, something like leopard or lion or even hyena, they need to be aware of it so that they're able to escape if they need to. Whereas if it were to sneak up on them, they'd have a bit of an issue on their paws. So you can see now that the one is standing up, look at how lean they are. So you can really see why I was saying their bodies are actually built for endurance and not for strength. So these wild dogs need to be on the high alert all the time. And just look at how big those ears are. So that's almost acting like a bit of a satellite dish, or a dish that's able to bounce sound into their ear canal. And so they're able to hear the tiniest of sounds and identify it from a distance as well. So because these wild dogs will be moving around almost constantly, they have a very, very large territory that they patrol. And so it's less a question of patrolling, but more a question of being able to hunt. Because they cover long distances, their metabolism is really high. And so these dogs will need to eat at least once every 2 days, maybe more often. But because of the fact that they are a part of a pack, and there's so many of them, they're able to split off. And so sometimes they won't just make one kill, but they can make multiple kills. And so they can sustain quite a large number of them. But it does mean that they tend to travel quite far, so they're actually really difficult to find out here in the Delta. So we are very, very lucky. So if you look at where these wild dogs are, can you see how open it is? So they've got shrubs behind them, and there's obviously a lot of wind blowing from the back and over the top of those shrubs. But they're all facing in a similar direction. They're not really facing different directions. So you'll probably find that these wild dogs have actually come from the area of where those shrubs are behind them, and now they're facing out to an area that they don't really know what's happening, and they don't know what could be there. But they're also looking for potential opportunities to hunt for later in the day. These wild dogs will typically be more active in the early hours of the morning, or heading towards mid to late evening. So just as the sun is rising or setting. But as you can see, they're not very interested in moving around right now. They're quite happy to just rest in the shade for now. I don't think they're going to go too far from this area. At least not now. Maybe this evening. Oh, that wild dog looks very big. That looks pregnant. That wild dog that's going to the shade. Look at her belly. Looks like quite heavily pregnant. And we may be having to keep a lookout for a wild dog den in this area, which is very exciting. Super, super exciting, especially because of how endangered wild dogs actually are across the globe. Any new additions to the population will be fantastic news. Considering how unlucky Barden and I have been in our search for these wild dogs, and that now that we know where they are, and there's a very high chance they're not going to move far from the area where they are, I think our best option is actually to try catch up with them this afternoon and see if maybe we can catch them in action. As I mentioned earlier, they're most active during dusk and dawn. So there's a fairly high possibility that they are going to be hunting this evening.
Finally.
Yeah, after so long.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, they're still here. And it looks like we got here just in time. They're all starting to move around. There's some that are playing in the background, which is always so incredible to see. I love watching wild dogs when they get so energetic. This form of play is actually their way of just strengthening their social bond so that they know they can communicate well and rely on each other when they're hunting. I'm sure you can also imagine that after resting pretty much the whole day, they really have a lot of pent-up energy. But moving around like this, getting up, getting active, it's just their way of kind of prompting the whole pack to go, okay guys, now's the time. It's the perfect temperature, it's cool enough. So now is maybe the best time for all of us to get up and get active and start looking for something to eat. And especially because that one female looks very heavily pregnant, she's going to need a lot of meat to sustain her throughout her pregnancy. But also, judging by how heavily pregnant she is, I think there's a good chance those puppies are coming soon, in which case she's going to need a lot of sustenance in order to support herself and those little ones. So they really need to be successful as much as they possibly can. We only hope that if they do manage to catch something, it happens before it gets too dark. For one, just because we won't be able to follow them after dark, especially being considered an animal that's most active during the daylight hours. We won't be able to shine spotlights on the dogs, but also because from an ethical standpoint and observing a hunt, we wouldn't be able to shine spotlights either way. Oh, and it looks like we're off. I'm super excited. I've never seen a successful wild dog hunt. I have seen wild dogs hunting before, but I'm quite excited to see if they manage to catch anything this afternoon. You can really see in their body language the way that the whole pack seems to move as one. And especially when they're standing out in the open like this, looking, listening, you can really see how that communication comes into play between the pack members and how they need to be really strategic when they're looking for something to hunt. Because if one pack member goes after something that the rest of the pack doesn't see, I'm afraid they're probably not going to be successful in taking it down. And that means wasting energy that they could have used in actually taking on something that was maybe a better opportunity. They are more built for endurance. So to sprint and try and close a really big gap only to tire yourself out before you even get to your target, I guess, doesn't make sense from a wild dog's perspective. Most of the time, wild dogs will go after things like impala. Here in the Delta, one of their staples is lechwe, but a zebra is a little bit too big for them. Look at how those wild dogs have actually gone up onto the termite mound to scan over these grasslands. And I mean, the grass isn't that tall, but a high point, I guess, is always an advantage. Unlike the big cats, like lions and leopards, wild dogs don't rely on stealth to hunt. They don't really care if anything sees them up there. If an impala is close enough, they'll be able to chase it down and actually outrun it. I find it so beautiful to see these wild dogs hunting in these vast open floodplains here in the Delta, because most of the packs that I've seen and been able to observe have been in places like Ngala or Kirkman's Camp. It's all thick vegetation, lots of thorny shrubs and trees, and you tend to lose the wild dogs quite often when they're hunting because you just can't follow. Out here, it's just It's so spectacular. It never ceases to amaze me how much ground these wild dogs actually cover while they're hunting. Oh, and it looks like we're off. Oh, that impala was so lucky it was too far. Well, it looks like these wild dogs have realized there's just no opportunities out here in the open floodplains, so they are starting to head off towards some of the islands a bit further in the distance. But unfortunately for us, there is just not enough light left for us to follow these wild dogs, and so we are going to have to leave them be. But we'll have to try catch up with them again and see if maybe next time they will be successful. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and please leave a comment in the comment section below and tell us what you thought of this week's WILDwatch Virtual Safari.